Hello everyone, Archana is here. Welcome to the third session of presentation, ICSE Class 9, Paper 2, Literature in English. In today's class, let us learn the poem, The Cold Within, written by James Patrick Kinney. About the poet, James Patrick Kinney was born on 15 January 1932 in Cleveland, Ohio. He spent 10 years at the St. Charles Seminary in Ohio, following which he decided to join the military. Kinney studied the Burmese language at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey before taking up a position in Okinawa, Burma. Following his military service, he worked as a teacher, a profession which helped him stay in touch with his interest of writing and storytelling. Kinney has written a couple of poems which reflect his positive credo towards life. Some of these poems include The Cold Within, The Secret of Life, and A Better World, among others. Kinney suffered a massive heart attack in 1948, which was followed by a number of strokes. He had to give up his career and was forced more than 8 final years of his life at Monterey Care Center. He passed away on 12th August 2007. Irish-American poet James Patrick Kinney uses his poetic parable, The Cold Within, to illustrate the folly of falling prey to discrimination that shortchanges our own humanity, which is written in the 1960s during the African American Civil Rights Movement, that is 1954 to 1968. Kinney was outraged by inhuman discriminatory attitudes at the time and wrote this poem to prompt some serious soul searching. How often are we wise enough to rise above our egos? How foolish are we when we give in to our prejudices? Its message is relevant even today when we face divisive outlooks in the world that lead to hatred and violence. The poem is a reminder to overcome our personal demons and be open to the wisdom of an egalitarian view, an attitude where everyone is considered equal in worth. Kinney's narrative poem tells a story to protest against bigotry and racism. The poem comprises of 8 quatrains, that is 4 lines per stanza. The original citation of the poem, The Cold Within, is unavailable, but a letter from Kinney's widow at an advice column tracks the interesting story behind its distribution. It seems that Kinney submitted the poem to many publications, but it was rejected as being too controversial for the time. Still, the poem, with its compelling message, spread quietly, shared in gatherings, over the radio and other information channels. Somewhere in this, the authorship of James Patrick Kinney was lost, and for a few decades, the source was cited as anonymous. Kinney's wife and son, however, brought his contribution to light. In the early 2000s, the Ligurian, an American-based Catholic magazine, became the first commercial publication to publish this poem while correctly accrediting the author. Now, let's deal with the poem. First stanza. 6 humans trapped by happenstance in bleak and bitter cold. Each one possessed a stick of wood, or so the story is told. The poem begins with the narrator telling us about 6 humans who were trapped by happenstance. Here, the meaning of the word happenstance means coincidence. So, 6 humans are trapped by coincidence in a bleak and bitter cold. The cold, hopeless setting is instantly sketched by the use of the alliteration bleak and bitter. The word meaning alliteration is repetition of sound. Here, bleak and bitter. B sound is repeated in these two words in the same line. In bleak and bitter cold. Bleak and bitter. An important feature of the first stanza is the use of the term humans. 6 humans trapped, because that is what the 6 people are, first and foremost. Before they are the members of one race or the other, one creed or the other, they are human beings. They are human beings who have physical and emotional needs and who are susceptible to both hatred and cold. Unfortunately, the failure on their part of this basic fact becomes a cause of their doom. Each one of them has a stick of wood. This wood isn't merely a physical object, but is symbolic of a resource or potential that all human beings possess. It is our willingness to use what we have for the sake of others that will keep the fire burning. Here, the story is told implies that the speaker has heard it from somewhere else, which makes this a part of oral parables and folk wisdom. We open up to a bleak tableau. The poet recounts a tale he has heard of 6 persons caught together in the grip of a severe winter. Each of them probably had a single stick of wood. Note, the poet is using of the word humans. He wants to draw attention to the gathering as specific individuals rather than as a collective group. They were trapped by happenstance, implying no escape from a situation created by chance. The adjectives dark and bitter describing the cold add to the ominous feeling. Here, ominous means something bad is going to happen. So, these adjectives, that is dark and bitter, which describes the cold, tells us that something bad is going to happen. Second stanza. Their dying fire in need of logs. The first man held his back, for on the faces around the fire, he noticed one was black. The second stanza cuts into a key character in the story, the dying fire. The group's prospects did not look good. In the heart of winter, keeping warm is critical to survival. The fire offers a chance of salvation if each person would use their respective logs to feed it, respective wood to feed it. The dying fire is a silent appeal to the group to help themselves by helping each other. The next verses reveal how the situation unfolds. We find that the first person withheld his log from the fire only because it would benefit a black person. This is racism, where there is discrimination because of a person's race. The man will not even warm himself if someone he looks down upon, simply because of skin color, will gain. So, in this stanza, the fire was slowly dying out and was in need of firewood. However, the first person did not put his log into the fire because when he looked at his companions, he noticed one of them was black. We will see how his racist attitude poisons the mind of his victim and how this racist attitude of his will backfire on him. This stanza brings to the fore a literary device of foreshadowing. The dying fire not only presents a particular condition but also foreshadows the fate of the characters. One moment it is a dying fire, and the other moment it is people dying. Third stanza. The next man, looking across the way, saw one knot of his church and couldn't bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch. So, what happened here? The second person looked across the fire and saw someone who he knew didn't share his religious ideology. And just because of that, he can't bear to give up his log to the communal fire. This is bigotry, which speaks of intolerance to a person because they do not share the same opinions or ideas. So, here in this stanza, the next man looked around and saw that one person in the group did not belong to his church or religion, and he held back his stick of birch wood. He is a religious bigot, plain and simple, and discriminates anybody who doesn't share the same religious views as his. Fourth stanza. The third one sat in tattered clothes. He gave his coat a hitch. Why should his log be put to use to warm the idle rich? The focus now shifts. Here is a person who seems poor. His tattered clothes, means old and torn clothes in the cold weather, hint at poverty. He perhaps felt the cold more than the others, as we notice that he gave his coat a hitch, means adjusting it closer to his body to ride out some warmth from the inadequate clothing. But here too is a dead end. We see that he is a victim of classism or discrimination based on social or economic class, considering those favorably placed than him to be idle. He is defensive, and in his eyes, the rich do not deserve his meager ration, and he will not part with his stick. So here, the third person was poor man, wearing torn and tattered as he was very poor. He pulled his coat to warm himself and thought, why should he put his log into the fire to warm the lazy rich people? He too held back his firewood. Fifth stanza. The rich man just sat back and thought of the wealth he had in store and how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. At cross purposes, we find the next exhibit of apathy. The rich man, caught up hoarding his riches in his head. He is oblivious to reality. Greed blinds him as he selfishly connives to keep his wealth. He even miserably holds on to his stick, keeping it from the poor whom he perceives as aimless and lazy. So here, the fourth was a rich man and thought only of his wealth he had accumulated and of how might he keep his riches away from the hands of the lazy and idle poor. As a result of his mistrust and prejudice, he too held back his firewood. It is interesting to see that both the rich and the poor keep their firewood to themselves due to the same underlying prejudice. Both consider each other to be lazy and idle folks. Perhaps both are wrong. These stanzas show how prejudices keep or develop when people are isolated from others who do not belong to the same racial, economic, or religious group that they belong to. Next stanza, sixth stanza. The black man's face bespoke revenge as the fire passed from his sight, for all he saw in his stick of wood was a chance to spite the white. Even the victim becomes an abuser here. We know the black person had experienced racism. Revenge for the atrocities he had faced from the white people was the only thing on his mind. One wonders if he had already resigned himself to die. He saw the fire pass from his sight. He realized that the fire was fast getting spent, but the spark of human kindness had died in him, and literally too he chose to let the group's fire die. He would perish, but he would take the others he hated down with him as well. So here, the fifth person was a man with dark skin, and all he thought was of taking a revenge on all the wrongs done to him. All he saw in his stick of wood was a chance to exact revenge upon the white-skinned man. Being the victim of racial discrimination, he has decided to give the white guy a taste of his own medicine, even if it translates to him dying as well. He had internalized the discriminatory logic of the system, which is effectively captured by the internal rhyme. For all he saw in his stick of wood was a chance to spite the white. So all the characters in the story use their firewood as a tool of retribution and end up becoming a victim of their own hatred. Next stanza. The last man of this forlorn group did not accept for gain. Giving only to those who gave was how he played the game. For the first time in the poem The Cold Within, the poet foreshadows the fate of the group by finally describing the bunch as forlorn or hopeless. Until then, the poet had reserved his judgment, allowing the reader instead to examine each individual in turn and derive his or her own conclusion. Unfortunately, we find that the last person also perpetuates the vicious circle of inertia. The person's attitude refers to a look shared between people, where each hopes that the other will do something that all of them want, but none are willing to initiate. In giving just to get, the last person played a losing move in the game. Here, game, a metaphor for the game of life. So here, the last person of the group did nothing except for profit. He believed only in giving to those who gave something back to him. This was the way he played the game of life. So he too did not part with his stick as no one else had. He too did not put his stick to the fire to burn as nobody did so. The selfishness of the sixth man is also the part of a larger problem. Everybody in this poem seemed to give only to those who give them social approval by belonging to the same class, creed, or color. Eighth stanza. Their locks held tight in death's still hands was proof of human sin. They didn't die from the cold without, they died from the cold within. So we witness the grim aftermath of the group's rigidity of spirit. Death comes and it is personified here with stilled hands. Personification means giving life to the lifeless thing. So each individual became their own agent of death, their hands frozen stiff with their refusal to act. The fact that each of them still possessed their firewood when they died suggests the twisted motives in retaining their firewood. Proof enough of sin. The final lines abound with irony. We realize it was not the cold weather outside that really killed the group after all. It was the cold in their hearts, the lack of warm human spirits, the cold within. The entire group perishes in the end, all holding their fire sticks. They have failed to be of use to each other due to their inherent prejudices. They refuse to acknowledge each other's humanity, and in doing so, they die despite having the resources to keep themselves alive. A personification, death's still hands, is used to highlight the consequences of committing this sin against humanity. They kill each other through inaction. This inaction is the product of the cold hatred they have against a single person, not everyone in the group. And in the process of killing others, they end up killing themselves. The conflict in the story is both external and internal in nature and may be seen in relation to two components of the poem. The characters are in conflict with their external environment, that is, the cold, and at the same time, by being pitted against each other and refusing to use their wood. This external conflict reaches resolution in the death of all. The poem ends by stating that the reason behind their death wasn't the cold outside, but the cold hatred and prejudice they had in their hearts. A cool heart soon becomes a dead heart, and a dead heart is always a cold one. The cold, the fire, and the stick of wood have dual significance in the poem. Literally, the cold outside is a harbinger of death. Harbinger means a signal of death. The fire is its antithesis and stands for possibility of life. And the sticks they have is a resource to keep the fire. Once again, I'm repeating. Here, the cold outside is a signal of death. The fire is its antithesis and stands for possibility of life. What? Fire. And the sticks they have in is a resource to keep the fire burning. Symbolically, the coal within represents hatred and selfishness. The fire represents love and common good, and the firewood they hold is symbolic of prejudice they have against each other. They must let go their sticks of prejudice and let it burn in the fire of love and fellow feeling if they are to ward off the cold. A harbinger of death, a signal of death, and keep the fire of life burning. However, because they cannot overcome the hatred and apathy that is the cold within, they fail to let go their prejudice, and everybody dies holding their firewood of prejudice. So here we have wound up the poem. Let us conclude the poem. The poem, The Cold Within, is a didactic poem. Though simple and straightforward in style, it conveys a profound meaning. It conveys a noble message in the form of a parable. The message is suggestive. Here, trapping of six human beings. The setting can be anywhere. Just by chance, six human beings get trapped in bitter cold. They are all sitting near the dying fire, their only hope of survival. Each one of them has a stick of wood. If any one of them gives up the stick, it will keep the fire burning and all of them will survive. But sadly and strangely, each has a reason to hold his or her stick back. The first of the group is the woman who does not want to give her stick, as it will save the black man's life, whose face she has seen in the light of the fire. The second man holds back his stick, as one of them he has noticed does not belong to his religion. The third is a very poor man in tattered clothes. He holds back his stick, thinking that it should not be used to warm the rich man among them. The fourth, a rich man, holds back his stick. He wants to keep his wealth away from the undeserving, lazy, poor persons. The fifth, the black man, is full of hatred for the white people. He wants to hurt the white somehow by holding back his stick. The last man of the group has his own reason to hold his stick back, as no one else is ready to renounce his stick, so he too will not give his stick or put his stick to the fire to burn. He thinks he will only give to those who give first. All perish. So all of them perish not because of the coldness from the outdoors, but because of the coldness in their hearts. The cold within conveys a useful message. It points out that we must have tolerance and love for one another. We should be kind and generous towards our fellow human beings. The cold within gives us a useful message through a little story, a small story. Six human beings found themselves trapped together in extreme cold. Their fire, their only hope of survival in the cold, was fast dying. Each one of them held a stick of wood. If any one of them gave up his or her stick to feed the dying fire, all of them had the chance to survive. But sadly, none of them was ready to oblige for one reason or the other. It was not the cold without, but cold within, which was sure to perish them. This cold within refers to lack of feelings for others, cruelty, indifference, hatred, so on and so forth. Like a good parable, the poem conveys the idea that we must tolerate, if not love, one another. We should be kind and generous towards our fellow human beings. We should not allow religion, color, or any other prejudice to become mean, selfish, and even self destructive. The theme of the poem. The cold within refers to the lack of feelings for or hatred of others, which is nothing short of a cardinal sin. Many of us develop this coldness in our hearts out of some prejudice. This prejudice may relate to race, color, caste, religion, or region. It makes us mean, stingy, selfish, greedy, or unkind. In the poem, The Cold Within, six persons trapped together in extreme cold somewhere perish some because of the one or the other prejudice. The coldness in their hearts rather than the coldness outdoors proves fatal to them. This group of six people is near the fire which is fast dying. Each one knows that it is only the fire that can make them survive. Each has a stick of wood which can keep the fire burning. Ironically, no one is willing to give up his stake for one reason or the other. The result is their death by cold within. This is the major theme of the poem. The idea is that the coldness in man's heart is a kind of death. Another theme of the poem is leading a life of sins. The poet shows that each one of us, represented by 6 humans, is afflicted with some kind of prejudice or sin, represented by the log of wood in each hand. So here, each one of us is represented by 6 humans, and our prejudice and sin represented by the log of wood in each one of their hands. The most obvious sins are of spite, stinginess, greed, revenge, etc. etc. The poem shows that each person in the unlucky group holds on to his or her stick, which should have been given to the dying fire. Had they given up their sticks, their sins, to be consumed by purifying fire, they might have survived if they would have given it, or might have gone to the other world without the burden of their sins. But they preferred to die with their sins in their minds. The poet gives a kind of message, a warning to us when he refers to their tragic end. Their logs held tight in death's still hands was proof of human sin. They did not die from the cold without, they died from the cold within. Now, let's know the literary devices used in the poem. Symbols. The use of symbols throughout the poem is almost self-explanatory. A log of wood in each hand is suggestive of sin. It becomes obvious that if logs are added to the dying fire, it will mean helping out someone other than one's own self. If the logs are held back, as indeed they are, it means holding on to the sins even beyond death. Each person's prejudice, envy, greed, revenge, spite, intolerance is thus symbolically represented by the stick of wood in each hand. Personification. Personification, the word meaning is it is a literary device where inanimate objects and abstract notions are spoken of as having human attributes or qualities. In a simple way, I would like to put it in this way. Personification means giving life to the lifeless object or lifeless things. Here, death is personified when the poet says, death's still hands. Metaphor. Metaphor is nothing but implied simile, comparison, without using like, as, or than. Metaphor, it is a literary device used in an imaginative way to show that somebody or something has the same qualities as another thing. So example here, log of wood, metaphor for sin. Fire, it is metaphor for enlightenment. The cold within is a metaphor for lack of warmth, hard-heartedness, self-centeredness, and inability to reach out to others. It is more dangerous than anything else. Alliteration. Alliteration is a literary device where a series of words begin with the same consonant sound. For example, 6 humans trapped by happenstance in bleak and bitter cold. But the first one held hers back. For of the faces and the fire, the black man's face bespoke revenge. For all he saw in his stick of wood, they did not die from the cold within. So here we have wired up the figures of speech. You have synonyms here. Please go through the synonyms. You can find stanza-wise synonyms, which are the possible difficult words. I felt that you might feel it quite complicated to understand. So those meanings I have included here. Please go through it along with the textbook. And before we go to the home assignment, I would like to speak about the title of the poem. How apt the title of the poem, The Cold Within, is. The title of the poem, The Cold Within, is simple, apt, and suggestive. In the last stanza, the poet himself explains it. The coldness which we carry in our hearts is dangerous and fatal. It prevents us from reaching out to others, from helping and saving ourselves and others. It makes us lead a sinful life. The aptness of the title comes through the tragic end of the 6 persons who hold on to their sticks and let the life-saving fire go out in the deadly cold outside. They are consumed by the cold within their hearts. So overall, the characters in the poem see the differences between them instead of the similarities. These assumed differences result in hatred of the other person, thereby ensuring mutual destruction. The poet urges all of us to examine the stick of wood that we have with us and throw it into the fire. Our mutual acknowledgement and appreciation of each other's humanity, transcending the narrow confines of class, caste, creed, and color, is the only way humanity can keep the fire burning. And with increasing polarization of modern society, precisely along those fault lines, it might as well be our last chance to protect the dying fire. The poem appeals to a heart forcefully. It asks us to give up all our prejudices. We should stop being unkind, ungenerous, greedy, revengeful, or spiteful. If we do not give up our prejudices, we are sure to hurt ourselves and others equally. Prejudices, which are sins, are self-destructive. Home assignment. Read the extract given below and answer the questions that follow. The black man's face bespoke revenge as the fire passed from his sight, for all he saw in his stick of wood was a chance to spite the white. First question. Who were the other 4 men in the group referred to earlier? Second question. What were the prejudices in the minds of the poor man and the rich man? Third question. What did the black man's face reveal? Fourth question. How could he hurt the white man? And the fifth question. Why was each of the men in the group unaware of self-destruction by his action? Thank you all.